Welcome, everyone. We are excited to just spend this time with you in a new setting. I'm Reverend Jenny Smith. I'm the pastor here at Wesley Freedom United Methodist Church, and I'm really pleased to be joined today by Cecil Cunigan. He is a counselor here in our community. He works with Suburban Crossroads Counseling. And he is often a partner with us here in our church as we meet the mental health needs of our community. Yeah. So I invited Cecil to come and have this conversation with us because I've been noticing that many of us are journeying through grief. Grief is a natural part of our lives that we experience so many times over. Yes. But during this year of pandemic, our grief is really compounded, yes. and in some ways more complicated. And it's also become obvious that for some it's harder to find mental health care yes. during this time. So I thought this would be a helpful conversation just to help our viewers explore what grief is, explore what grief can look like and feel like, and then some resources to help as we're journeying through seasons of grief. Yes. So as we get started, Cecil, if you could just share with us kind of an introduction to what grief is and how it's experienced, what it looks like in our lives.
Sure. Thank you. First of all, Pastor Jenny, I just want to thank you and Wesley Freedom for allowing myself and Suburban Crossroads Counseling to partner with you in this community, which my family and I are part of. So this relationship has been really special and personal, for me. I'm especially grateful too for the time and the relationship and the conversations that I've had with Sharon Feldman, here. She's been a great source of support and encouragement, as we've been kind of doing what we're doing and supporting the community here over the last year or so.
And Sharon Feldman is the director of the Family Resource Center, a great resource for families that are in the midst of practical, physical, emotional, spiritual challenges.
Yeah, right. Again, thank you. Grief is a humongous area that all of us experience at some point in time in our lives. And grief is a natural response to an emotional feeling that one encounters when they experience the loss of a significant loved one and or the loss of some other significant event or activity, in their lives. So since we all experience grief in some way or another, it's very important that we develop positive and healthy coping mechanisms to help us through that process of grief. And as we think about grief and how it affects one, it's important to know what grief really is. So I'm grateful that you give us the opportunity to talk a little bit about grief and to make those who are watching, the members and those in this community, aware of the idea that grief is something that we all eventually have to deal with in some way, shape, or form. And having some knowledge of what it is and how we can manage it gives one strength and encouragement that they'll be able to effectively handle that event as it happens in their individual lives.
Sure.
Right.
I really like, Cecil, that you're saying grief is normal.
Yeah.
That it's an unavoidable part of our human journey. And I think there's some negative connotations sometimes put on grief, that you're grieving because you don't have faith, or you're grieving because you're weak. Yes. But grief is a healthy part of life.
Yes.
And it's not ours to try to avoid grief, but ours to learn how to journey through it in healthy ways and acknowledge that it is real, and then find ways, as you said, to cope in the midst of it.
Yes.
Sometimes I have folks ask me, what is the difference or the similarity between grief and bereavement?
Okay.
You hear both of those words being, put out into the community. In what ways are they related, and is there uniqueness between them?
Sure. Well, bereavement refers to the length of time, and a lot of people have different views about grief and bereavement and how they overlap. But grief is the experience of that loss, right?
Okay.
Bereavement is the amount of time and the experience that follows that grief experience. And for many people, depending on how they experience that loss, how they respond to that loss, that bereavement period can be healthy or unhealthy. It can be a shorter period of time or a longer period of time. And we'll talk more about just the idea that we all are unique, Pastor Jenny, which means that we all have a possibility of responding to grief and or bereavement in different ways. And to just kind of back up a little bit on the idea that you mentioned, that grief quite often is looked upon by many people as a sense of weakness or a lack of faith. Jesus grieved.
Yes.
And
the shortest scripture in the Bible, right? Jesus wept.
Yes.
Yep. He wept with Martha and Mary as they grieved the death of their brother.
Yes.
Yeah,
and
so
his,
powerful.
His close friend.
Yes.
Right? And so he did that as an example to us that grieving was Jesus never sinned.
Right.
He was without sin.
Yeah.
So it cannot be a sin to grieve and to show that there is some emotion, because we are emotional beings, mind, body, and spirit, right? We are emotional beings, so grief comes along with the territory.
Yes.
How we deal with it, with that grief and bereavement, is what we want to make sure that we do in a healthy way again. Right.
I like that acknowledgement that Jesus grieved, to think that God grieves.
Yeah.
We hear that biblically so often, that God is weeping with God's children, that God grieves our losses, that God grieves when we withdraw from God, that there's, in grieving, we're really connected to God in those tears, in that sense of loss and longing. That's a beautiful thought, because so often in our grief, I think we pull away from God, feeling there's something wrong or lacking about us. And really, in our experience of grief, we can come towards God, who understands our grief, is with us in that grief.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. I also like, you mentioned, Cecil, that different people experience grief differently.
Yes.
As I minister to people, I remind folks, and I'm just reminded so often, two brothers can lose a father and have profoundly different experiences of grief. It can look different. It can take different time. One might grieve right away, hard and fast, and one might be delayed in their grief, and it might not find them for some time.
Right.
And that as long as we all allow ourselves to grieve, it's okay for that process to look very different. And that it's such an important thing, I think, in relationships. A husband and wife who might tragically lose a child or a pregnancy, their experience of that grief can be so different. And them knowing that it's okay for that experience to be different is so important. Because otherwise it can really be problematic in that relationship. Why aren't you feeling what I'm feeling? Well, it's okay that we're experiencing this differently. And we're on our own journey. We can be together even as it's unique.
Great. Absolutely.
Very good. What kind of things do we grieve? You mentioned in bereavement, that's often used particularly for the loss of a loved one, a spouse, or a significant person. But in this season, I'm noticing people are grieving broadly. Not just the loss of loved ones. What other places do you often see folks, engaging that grief process?
It's thank you for that question, because there's a broad spectrum of losses that might come under the title of grief, so to speak. We, in this particular season that we're in now, with the pandemic, with the virus, all of the chaos with the election season that's been going on, and the school systems and children, how they are being affected. You and I talked about that a little bit earlier. Children, in many ways, are grieving the loss of the socialization that they typically experience from being able to go to school and to interact with other friends, right? Parents, many have lost their jobs and are experiencing that in different ways, right? A lot of that has to do with the idea of how it's affecting their home, the loss of income, the change and the dynamics that are brought about, and who's going to be home to babysit or to take care of children. So they are losing that normalcy, of life.
Oh, wow. I like that. I'm gonna pause that and say we're grieving the loss of normalcy.
Yes.
We're grieving the structure, the rhythm that we got used to. That is so real. It is so real, and it's systemic. It's across the land.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And those things are occurring quite often because of people's reaction to the pandemics and some of the major issues that we're facing, worldwide and certainly in our own country, right? But there are normal things that are kind of going on too. We still are dealing with divorce. And separations, relationships that are breaking up, and all of the things that are occurring as a result of that, right? And those things create real problems within not just that family structure, but within society, as well. So people are grieving the loss of relationships. People are grieving the loss of animals, pets.
Right.
I mentioned to you.
This was a loss for your family.
Yes, we lost our dog just of 10 years, just a few months ago, right in the middle of the pandemic. And it kind of set us back a little bit, being able to process what that loss is and acknowledge it. You mentioned the word acknowledging that there was a loss that we occurred. But then being able to understand that we don't have to stay there. We don't have to sit with those emotions that we'll talk about a little bit later, because the relationship has changed. It hasn't. When we lose a loved one, the relationship changes. We still have a relationship, but the relationship has changed, right? We don't have the ability to touch and hold them anymore. But we still have very pleasant memories that we have access through by looking at pictures or videos and that type of thing. So so those are the kind of things that we experience in various types of losses. And being able to identify that there is a loss that's taking place, and why am I feeling the way that I'm feeling now? I lost my job. Those are real things that are happening, with people. I used to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning to drive to work, and that's not I lost that normalcy, again. And it's important that we recognize that that's happened to us and try to deal with it in a healthy way.
Sometimes just naming what's going on, because we can feel, what is wrong with me?
Right.
What is wrong with me? And to name, or to ask ourselves, is this grief? Because it could be some other things. In a future conversation, I hope we can talk about depression and anxiety, which can correlate with grief, but are unique from it. But to explore, am I grieving? That really helps us to name what's going on with me. Why is it hard to get out of bed? Why am I feeling angry? Or why am I feeling anxious? All of those can come, out of that place of grief and loss. I'm really glad you mentioned jobs, because I know many people are grieving the loss of a career, the loss of a job, but also, some of our folks, thank God, still have their jobs, but they're grieving what their job used to be. Keith's our camera guy. I'm looking at him. He hasn't left home to work, I think, since March, which I think might make him happy. But he's giving me a thumbs up. But there is even loss in that.
Yes.
My husband's working from home. He's a teacher. But he's grieving on some level. He no longer sees his colleagues. He no longer works collaboratively. So it's a very isolating, work reality. So there's even some grief, even if you're happy to not be commuting, there's some grief in not, seeing your people, not having a role in the office. So a lot of different layers of grief around employment, primarily for those who have also the concern for financial well-being, but grief all around in that area. The other thing you mentioned that I heard was grief when our role changes. I so often minister to people who have lost someone that they were a caregiver for. And I recognize in that they lost a loved one, so there's grief in that change of relationship. But their role was also taken. If their day job, sometimes 24-hour job, was taking care of somebody, you grieve the loss of, what am I getting up for now? And acknowledging that and naming that is real is significant.
Well, as individuals, having a sense of purpose, is extremely, important. And when our roles have changed, or certain events in life have changed for us, we can lose that feeling of a sense of purpose. And that can really throw certain individuals into a real spiral. Some individuals that are being extremely affected by that whole thought process now, as we sit in this beautiful sanctuary, church members, and staff. You're not having the same worship services as we did in January and February, perhaps, right?
You're right. Cecil,
how
we have a grieving choir. Our choir is grieving because they can't sing. You're right. So many people displaced not only from paid work, but also from their volunteer work, their church work, their community work. I want to pivot because we've talked about grieving healthfully, moving through that process of grief that is so natural. What do some of the stages of grief look like? So how do I know I'm journeying through, and what might I anticipate, would be a part of this grief process?
Well, many individuals look at different stages of grief, right? You'll find some that may indicate that there are 7 stages or 10 stages and different levels of grief. Usually, some of the experiences can be what I like to call a DAPT. I kind of use that as an acronym. Depression, could be certainly one of the symptoms that one might feel themselves feeling. Anxiety. Just the anxiousness about what is next, for me.
Because if you've had one loss, you felt the bitterness of that. Then you're really amplified to what's coming next. What else is going to bring that kind of pain? That anxiety is so natural.
And that could be whether it's the loss, anxiety or depression related to the loss of a loved one, or employment, or again the normalcy of life, right? And so some other emotions that could come out of that could be denial. Just the idea, is this really happening to me? When the pandemic initially began, we all said this is just 2 weeks, right? This is just 2 weeks, and here we are. I don't know how many 7,
months
8
in.
months down the road, right?
Denial.
Denial. And can this really be going on? And so, you know,
Anger. I
bargaining.
don't know if you've said anger,
Anger.
but I know that's a big piece for me. When I am grieving, I just get angry. You know,
Yeah.
I get mad at the circumstance. And
Right.
it's really helped me. You and others have said to me, like, anger is just a part of it. You
Yeah.
know, you try to find healthy ways to journey through it. So,
Right.
like you said, you don't get stuck there.
Right, so you don't.
Right.
Yeah, so you don't get stuck
Right.
there. But bargaining, you know, is another way. You know, if can it be me? You know, take
Yeah.
me. You know,
Right.
or
Right.
maybe if I lost my job, you know, instead of that person. You know, so there's a bargaining that goes on, and then eventually, hopefully, you mentioned the word being stuck or being unstuck, right? Once you go through that series of emotions, hopefully we get to a level of acceptance, right? But even after getting to a level of acceptance and being able to feel confident, you know, that I can now move on, things happen. You
Yeah.
know, triggers, you know, are all over the
Yes.
place, right?
Yes.
Particularly in reference to the loss of a loved one.
Yes.
Holidays are coming up, right? What a tremendous trigger, you know, there could be that would catapult the person all the way back to a period of anger,
Right.
or depression,
Right.
or feel like
Right.
anxiety.
Right.
So as we travail through that series of stages, being able to ensure that we're doing it in a healthy way, and that we're reinforcing, you know, those
Yes.
things, that we're getting the support that we
Yes.
need, is extremely important, because it's a cycle.
Right.
It's a circle. It's a cycle, and
Right,
at
and we
any
want to
moment-
journey through it. You
Right.
can't avoid it. You're journeying through.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Now, sometimes we do get stuck,
Yeah.
or sometimes grief is more, you use the term complicated grief.
Yes, right.
And these are, if we're all going to grieve, I asked Cecil to share with us, you know, how do we know if we're starting to lose our health? How do we know maybe we're headed into a troubling place
Sure.
that can really affect our wellness? You know,
Okay.
what are some of the things to look for that this grief is moving, you know, from that natural process
Right.
to something that maybe we need some help with?
Right.
So tell us about complicated grief.
Complicated grief usually involves that level of depression has maybe gone from a 2 to an 8, you know, if we're scaling, right? And now that individual maybe, you know, can't get out of bed in the morning,
Yes, yes.
right? They're not eating their normal meals or mealtime, right? Or maybe they're binging, you know,
Yeah,
from one way or
yes.
the other. Isolation. You know, maybe they become isolated now and not participating in the normal social activities. Maybe they're not coming to church, to worship service on Sunday mornings now, you know? So, and once you recognize that those things are happening, it becomes what we like to call a clinical. You know,
Yes.
and once that
Yes.
grief process becomes clinical over a period of time, then that's a point where that individual perhaps wants to seek some pastoral
Right.
counseling for
Right.
care,
Right.
and certainly some professional, you know, counseling. But
Yeah.
usually, once an individual is at that point, there are others, family members, friends, or associates that are recognizing that,
Right.
and maybe are kind of talking to them about it, and maybe
Right.
making some suggestions to them that they may want to seek some support.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I heard two things that I wanted to really amplify for our viewers. Because in this season of pandemic, many of us are isolated
Sure.
because of social distancing.
Yes.
Right? So it feels to me that kind of a self-check is kind of important, and I
Sure.
really like the things you talked about. So, you know, am I able to get out of bed in the morning?
Right.
You know, if I really just can't get out of bed in the morning, then I probably need some help.
Yes.
If I'm not eating or I'm binge eating to
Right.
self-comfort, you know, those are things that kind of show I'm above. I've always used like the glass or the bucket. You know,
Sure.
we can all take a certain amount of emotional angst.
Yes. Right.
And then it gets over the threshold of our natural coping, and it starts spilling over. So
Yes.
if we're not getting out of bed, or we're not eating, or we're binge eating, or we're isolating
Sure.
beyond what is social distancing. So if you're staying home, but you stop wanting to answer the phone, you know,
Yeah.
that might be a sign that there's some grief that needs some care.
Absolutely.
Because even those that are reaching out to you, you're now saying, you know, gosh, I just can't engage.
Yes. Okay.
So to do a little self-check, and then the other thing that you said was, and this is hard because we're all kind of, we want to be the masters of our own minds, right?
Yes.
But you also said, and I encourage our viewers to hear, if your loved ones show concern, they're not just being annoying, right? They
Yes.
know you the best. And so if they show concern, our natural reaction is, I'm fine, especially if we're in the anger phase of grief. I'm
Absolutely.
fine, you know, give me space.
Yes.
But, you know, kind of to take a deep breath and to try to listen to what our loved ones are speaking, you know, that they might know us well enough to know
Yes.
that we're not ourselves.
Right.
And it might be time to welcome some help.
Amen.
Yeah. So that's complicated grief. You also mentioned to me cumulative grief.
Right.
And I think this is very real right now.
Yes.
That build-up effect, right?
Right. The stacking on top of each additional loss
Yes.
or grief event, right?
Right.
And sometimes that cumulative grief can be not just from this immediate season. It could be events or incidents that have happened years past that were
Right.
not effectively dealt with.
Yes.
That were just kind of sitting in the back of our subconscious,
Yes.
and certain things were happening. Maybe we were getting involved with other relationships, or we had to move, or different things that happened in our lives that did not allow us to properly grieve with that particular loss. So they start to pile up.
Yes.
And then we get to a situation like we have now that's so comprehensive, you know, with this virus and some other things that are going on until it explodes.
Yeah.
We can kind of explode.
Yeah.
And then there's that anger response,
Yeah.
you know, that
Sure.
comes out. That is an unhealthy,
Right.
you know, response. But
Right.
it could be, you know, yelling or screaming or whatever, or turning our backs on those who have been supportive of us.
Right.
So it's important that we allow ourselves and allow others
Right.
the opportunity. You mentioned the word opportunity. You've said that
Yeah.
several times, but allowing others and giving ourselves the opportunity
Yes.
and the permission, you know, to deal with each one of those losses as they come about.
Yes.
Because around the corner, Pastor Jen, there's another event.
Yeah.
And if we're not handling the one,
that's so. I wish it weren't so, but it is
Yeah.
that we want to live through
Yeah.
what we're going through today
Right.
because we need to create the capacity for
Yes.
what comes tomorrow.
Yes, yes,
And that's profound and humbling.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the work. You know, that's the emotional, spiritual work
Right, right.
that we're called to do each day.
Yes,
You
yes.
know, to process,
Right.
to pray through,
Right.
and to kind of give ourselves time and permission
Absolutely.
to do that emotional, spiritual work instead of. I like that word cumulative. If we don't do the emotional, spiritual work, it just piles up,
Builds up.
and then it's going to come out somewhere.
Right.
You know, and it's probably going to come out at someone you really love,
Yeah.
because we always snap at the people that we really love because they're safe, you know?
Yeah,
I tell my family I snap at them because I love them the most, you know, like, because it's not safe to let that grief or that anger or, you know, any of
Outside.
that out on a
Yeah.
stranger,
Right.
you know?
That's right.
That's hard. So if we realize, you know, we do this self-assessment, or several people that love us are starting to say, hey, are you okay? And we realize we're in the midst of grief that isn't just the natural process,
Right.
but we've gotten stuck, or it's become cumulative or complicated.
Okay.
You know, what would you recommend to us as support? You know, how can we reach out?
Okay. Okay.
And what can we do to kind of help ourselves get back to a healthy place?
Well, you mentioned the idea of self-care, and that's primary. You
Yeah.
know. Within the confines of self-care, we typically think about making sure that we're doing those things, such as getting enough rest, make sure that we're following the proper diet, that we're seeing our primary care doctor or others on a regular basis as we typically would do, right? One of the other elements, though, and that you mentioned, is the spiritual self-care, right?
Yes.
Following those spiritual disciplines that have been a part of us, for whatever number of years or time that has been.
Yeah.
Because when we stray away from following those spiritual disciplines, it doesn't allow us the opportunity to be able to think clearly and to be conscious about taking care of ourselves in those other ways that we should. So are we praying on a regular basis like we always have? Are we going to worship? Well, we may not be able to go and hear Pastor Jenny, at the worship service, but we can do it on video or however you're doing it now.
Yeah.
Are we reading? Are we still being disciplined enough to read Scripture and to stay in our Bibles and fellowshipping as much as we possibly can? We're doing it in a different way now, but there's still a few weeks ago. I was up in the Eldersburg area, up near the Panera Bread, and it was a Sunday morning.
He was at my favorite place, Panera Bread.
Well, listen to this. It was maybe about 4 or 5 couples were sitting in Panera Bread's parking lot.
Wow.
In their lawn chairs. They were socially distanced.
Yeah.
And this was like 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And I thought, what a novel idea.
Yeah.
They I don't know what they were talking about.
Right.
I don't know what the conversation was going on. But they were fellowshipping. They had a little table in front of them, there was coffee cups.
Yeah.
They were making the best of that situation. So there are ways that we can get around, not being able to do the normal things that we can do and still be able to move forward. So just making sure that we do positive self-care, whatever that might look like, for us. And then the other piece of it is, how do we support individuals that we recognize are going through a grief or bereavement, right? Listening to them, just being present. That ministry of present, as you well know, is just so important. Sometimes not talking, not saying anything. Maybe the moment just doesn't call for conversation. Maybe it just calls for just sitting and just being there,
We're both highly trained in this work, and we still know that we're usually speechless, right? When someone has had a profound loss, the more trained you are, the less you say, probably, because we just know that persons just need your presence, your love, your listening ear. And not any of those cliche answers that just aren't enough when we're really hurting.
Absolutely.
I want you to tell us more about, seeking out some support, Cecil. But I noted as you were talking about self-care, when we're really in the midst of grief, the things we need to do to take care of ourselves aren't things we really feel like doing, right? But as you were saying those, I thought, the first step is saying, well, I might not feel like eating, but my body is valuable to God and to me and to my family. So even though I don't feel like it, I'm gonna eat a little something, and I might not feel like getting out of bed, but the first step to this day is getting out of bed and putting my clothes on, and so kind of just doing that because you're valuable, because you're loved, even if you don't feel like it, just getting started. What support, if even that is too much, Cecil, what support, do you recommend persons reach out for a professional counselor? I think I heard you say that.
Sure.
And generally, I often tell people to talk to their insurance company and see what counselors are permitted, or to reach out to some trusted people. I know Pastors are always available to help
Yes.
people kind of match up with counselors. They can call Suburban Crossroads Counseling.
Yes.
But any of those, and usually
Right.
you can just say to the intake person, I'm going through a season of grief, or I'm not even sure,
Right.
but I just know it's hard to get out of bed. And so I'm at, you kind of said that clinical grief, that
Right.
place where you realize this is affecting my physical,
Sure, yes.
emotional
Yes.
well-being, spiritual well-being. So reaching out for that help. I know here at Wesley Freedom, and many of you are watching, you're associated with other churches. Cecil's, what's your church? I know you're in the Baptist church here in the
Right.
neighborhood.
Colonial Baptist.
Colonial
in-
Baptist Church.
In Randall Center. Right.
To talk to your local pastor
Absolutely.
or church. And,
Yes.
here at Wesley Freedom, the pastors are happy to have an initial session with you, just to listen,
Yes.
to hear, to help you process, and then to help you figure out the next steps. And I know most of my colleagues are very happy to, have that initial conversation. Right now we're outside, today's a beautiful day, thank God, or we're on Zoom, or we have established a room with air purification to do those initial counseling sessions. So, reaching out to your pastor, reaching out to counseling centers near you.
Right.
They're staffed with people, because I know it's intimidating to make that first call.
Yes.
But they're staffed with people that can help match you
Yes.
to the right clinician, the right listener.
Right.
Many churches around also have a program called Stephen Ministry. And I know here at Wesley Freedom, we actually have some Stephen ministers who are available to be caregivers. Stephen ministers are trained listeners who are trained to journey through grief with you.
Sure.
So they don't have the answers, but they're trained to pray and
Right.
meet with you once a week and just help abide, through that season.
Great.
So any of these can be a good
Absolutely.
kind of, I'm valuable enough, I'm not going to stay stuck
Right.
in this grief if it has become paralyzing.
Sure.
Or life zapping,
Right.
right? So Cecil, I know you have a couple kind of final thoughts. What would you encourage folks as kind of your final thoughts on how to journey through grief in a healthy way?
Well, I think I encourage them to listen to you.
Thank you.
And everything
That's
you
what I'm
just
going to
said-
tell them. Listen to Cecil. Call Cecil.
Everything you just said
Yeah.
are ways to help an individual journey through a season of grief, right? But certainly doing some of the things of reaching out to support groups as well. The Stephen Ministry that you guys have here. I was going to mention that. That's a great ministry. Some support groups that are out there are like Grief Share.
Yes.
Some various churches may have a grief share group that I think some of them now are doing virtual
Yes.
services. So that's always a good idea to be involved with the grief group, if it's at all possible. Many professional counselors too will do an initial phone conversation. Just to kind of give you a feel for for where one might be, and if there's a need for perhaps some additional support, that might be necessary. So I think you covered all of the bases, and I think it would be it's just a great idea to encourage yourself to make the first step.
Yes.
That is so important to
Nobody else can do that for you, right?
No one else can do it for you.
Yeah.
But it's a great thing if you can make that first step, to go into a counseling situation. Pick up the telephone and make the call. And just to kind of piggyback on something you said earlier in terms of just getting out of bed and kind of getting yourself going, I encourage folks to use a technique that's like launching and landing. How do you launch yourself in the morning? What was that process that you used several months ago? What were you doing? Were you getting up? Were you reading some scripture? Were you reading a devotional?
Yeah.
Were you embracing your spouse or your children? what were you doing?
Getting a shower.
Yeah, getting a shower.
That's
right.
what's really important
That's
for me.
important right now.
Yes,
That's really important for someone
right.
who's going through some periods of
Getting
depression.
dressed. Yeah.
Yes. So launching yourself in the morning, it makes a difference in terms of what your day is going to look like.
Yep.
How do you get, and then how do you land yourself at night?
Yes.
How do you get yourself ready for bed to relax, right?
Right.
Are you using that same similar process? Are you having a cup of tea? Are you embracing your spouse? Are you tucking the kids in at night?
Right.
Are you reading that nighttime devotion or scripture that you typically would do?
Yeah.
Those things are crucial
Right.
in terms of helping you to stay focused on a healthy journey.
Yes.
Through grief. So that's my parting
you.
thought, Pastor Jenny.
Awesome.
And thanks
I
again.
love that, thinking about how to launch a day and land a day,
Yes.
beginning and ending well. So Cecil has agreed to come back and talk again. We're getting close to the holidays.
Absolutely.
And our next session, 2 weeks from now, we're going to talk about anticipatory grief.
Yes. Okay.
Which is, you really helped me in sharing this a few weeks ago. Some of the angst we're feeling as we come towards Thanksgiving and Christmas is we're anticipating that it's going to be different.
Yes.
And so our next session, we're going to talk about that anticipatory grief and then how to really find hope and health through this holiday season that is going to be so much different.
Yes.
But how to really, find that joy and that peace in the midst of a really different holiday.
Right.
And I'm really looking forward to that because I know
forward to
that's
it.
going to be something that all of us need to hear and think about.
Thank you.
So God bless you all and keep you. And we'll hope to see you at a church nearby. The Good Baptists will welcome you, and Wesley
Amen.
Freedom's always happy to see you
Yes,
as well.
yes.
God bless and keep you, and we'll see you soon.